just a Brisbane kind of love. Brisbane kind of love. It's just a Brisbane kind of love.
Okay, Len, welcome to Switchboard.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Yeah.
Great to be back in Brisbane and participating in something that's quite unique and I think culturally different to when I left Brisbane 35 years ago.
So you're from here originally?
I was from Queensland originally. I actually grew up in central Queensland.
Okay.
And I moved to Brisbane to go to university and got my first job, I guess, in Canberra, and for a few years. Then I moved to Sydney and I never really came back.
Yeah, what prompted you to go? I mean...
Look, for me, I found Brisbane a difficult place to be. I found it very, what I used to call white bread, just a really white bread city. There wasn't a lot of diversity here, and there wasn't a lot of, I don't know, a work here, I guess, that I was interested in doing. And in particular, when I moved to Sydney, I realised what was missing, I guess, and it was those vibrant, diverse cultures which were really going gangbusters in Sydney, which were not in Brisbane. And
when was this?
that was So I left to go to Canberra in 1982 and moved to Sydney in 86. But even in Canberra, I got a large exposure to, I would say, Middle Eastern, Islamic cultures, and particularly the art forms therein. And that really, truly, really inspired me. I got my hands on clay as a ceramic artist when I was at the University of Queensland first off. And you know, as just mucking around on weekends in my spare time at my course, and I knew I really loved it. And then when I moved to Canberra, there was a couple of local artists who were running courses at the ANU Art Centre and doing ceramics. And I just absolutely fell in love with it. And they in particular had done a lot of work with Middle Eastern and Islamic ceramic works. And particularly the ANU Art School was very much involved in that at that time. It was being run by a guy called Alan Peascod. And if you look at his work, he spent a lot of time in Iran at that time, which was a very vibrant country at that time, learning ceramics. And he brought that back to Australia, and and then thence they kind of brought in to the students that they were then teaching.
And this was your introduction to using Islamic influences?
Yeah, in my work, and it stayed with me, even though really I've only just been doing ceramics more or less full-time probably for the last 5 or 6 years. And obviously I had to earn a living prior to that, and I did lots of different things in Sydney. I always kept my hands on clay, and I was a great collector of ceramic arts. So yeah.
And how do you incorporate those influences in your art now?
Look, it's really around the shapes. So although everyone puts their own stamp on things, I love the shapes. And it's kind of what I refer to. There's the physical shape, the physical object, which is the 3D thing, but there's also the negative space around it. And that's, if you look at an object from a distance, you see the beauty of it, and it's that negative space that sits around it. I also particularly like, they used a lot of what I would call dry glazes, and they're glazes that aren't glossy at all. And I absolutely love them. So that's basically what I use, and I love the way the light picks up on these, and it literally just beams off them. In technical terms, it's because there are really, really ultrafine crystals forming in the glaze, and so it captures the light and disperses it out. Absolutely beautiful.
Wow. So you talked about Iraqi art before, and Persian art, I guess. Are there particular practitioners that you draw inspiration from, or that you've looked at?
Yeah, look, first of all, I guess Alan Peascod, who was an Australian in the 80s and 90s in particular, was a great practitioner of this work. A lady called Simone Fraser, who's an Australian practitioner. Elizabeth Charles, again, who's an Australian practitioner. People go off in their own, they take these influences and go off on their own journey. And of course, that's how it has to be. But you can see the influences there, the Persian influences in their artworks. And a lady called Jan Dunn from Canberra, who did a lot of Arabic lustre work, and a guy called Greg Daly. Not so much in their shapes, but he does a lot of reduced lustre, which is a particular glaze art form which came from Persia.
Okay, so it's really more about adopting techniques rather than replicating the...
Yeah, it's never really about replication, because although you may think, oh, well, I'll start having a go at that and see what I can do, you always come up with your own ideas, and what you want to do about it. And that's what I particularly love. So you can start off with something, you think, oh, I'm going to throw something around this shape, but then I always like to allow for a certain level of serendipity in developing the work, because all types of things happen, and I may stop halfway through and go and have a cup of coffee and come back, or I might bump it and knock it off centre, and then, oh well, that's it, but then I work with that.
I mean, it sounds, in that respect, your work sounds very organic.
Absolutely. And I'm not a huge fan of perfect work. So I will throw something and then either manipulate it on the wheel or manipulate it afterwards. And rather than make a piece, throw a form in one piece, I'll make it in multiple pieces, because that way it's never really on centre. It allows me to create texture on the surface and create a more individual form.
So you said before, you left Brisbane in the early to mid-80s, you went to Canberra and you went to Sydney, and now you've come back. I'm interested, what has brought you back?
I guess family, and I guess there was the desire to do my art a little bit more full-time. It meant that we could sell out of Sydney, like so many people do, come to Brisbane where it's a little bit cheaper to buy a house, and pursue an art form. It also meant we could have a place where we could set up a kiln and a little studio, which is not so easy in a small terrace house in Sydney. I did find coming back a little bit difficult, because as I mentioned before, one of the first things we saw coming back, because I stayed on at Tambourine when we first moved here, was Hens Dam, and I thought, oh Lord, what have I done? It just brought back such terrible memories of that time, of Bajolki Peterson, of authoritarianism, and this incredible white bread culture that had just spread through Brisbane in particular, I think. But it's been great, the city has come alive, and with things like the Switchboard project going on, I found it really, I think we've probably done more artistic things in Brisbane in the last couple of years than what we did in Sydney prior to leaving the last few years. And Sydney's changed a lot as well. When I first moved to Sydney, I moved into Surrey Hills, which was not anything like the place that you would think it is now. You know, there was virtually an art gallery on every corner. There was a live music venue at every pub on every corner. And it was a very, very vibrant little place to be. That's not so much the case now, because it is a very expensive place to live. But coming here, it kind of almost feels a little bit like things have really been happening here. And it's great to start to be involved in the arts community here.
So how has your journey back into Brisbane influenced what you're creating now?
I think I'm doing a lot more of it for a start, so I can. I think my journey back in, I guess it's been a little bit around bringing what I've known and what on the influences that I picked up in that part of in Sydney and and bringing them back to Brisbane with me, but then being able to explore things a little bit more deeply here. So at the moment, for instance, I'm really only using one glaze to create pots with, and exploring the impact of temperature on that glaze. So, and that might sound really boring, but it goes from the most incredibly intense royal purples to vibrant, vibrant, vibrant pale aqua blues. And that's a product of having my own kiln, of having my own space, and being able to work at my own pace, rather than having to find a studio in Sydney where I have to conform with what happens in that studio to do my work.
Yeah.
So it's been great.
And just finally, I'm just curious about, the role you see, or, how, what you're hoping to get through Switchboard, or the role that Switchboard might have for the creative community here in Brisbane.
For me, it's about, so in Sydney I had a gallery I used to work through, and I had a gallery in Melbourne I used to work through, and that was great, and it was kind of the process you really use, but it has its limitations. Whereas in Brisbane, I don't have those connections, and I've had to be a lot more independent, and I have found that great. And so this for me allows me to meet a lot more artists. It allows me to work with a multidisciplinary artist team and get to a lot more people, basically.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Len.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.